Across the vast landscapes of history, war has been shaped not just by brute force, but by the brilliance of strategy. Battles were often won before the first sword was drawn or the first shot was fired, because commanders who mastered the art of tactics could outmaneuver enemies far stronger in numbers or weapons. The story of war is, in truth, the story of minds that bent chaos to their will. When Alexander the Great stood at the banks of the Granicus and later at Gaugamela, his genius was not in sheer strength, but in how he read the battlefield. Facing Persian forces that dwarfed his Macedonian army, he used the phalanx to anchor his line and then struck with cavalry at the enemy's weak points, shattering the illusion of Persian invincibility. His strategy was not simply about defeating an army, but about breaking the will of empires. Surtout. Centuries later, Hannibal crossed the Alps with elephants and men battered by the mountains, yet what awaited Rome was terror in the form of his tactics. At Cannae, he encircled an army twice his size, turning the open plains of Italy into a trap where legions suffocated under their own numbers. Agincourt. Rome learned that day that discipline was not enough against a mind that could twist terrain and timing into weapons sharper than any sword. In the medieval era, when knights clashed in heavy armor, battles were thought to be decided by brute charges, yet strategy still ruled. At Agincourt, Henry V faced a French host far larger than his weary English force. Mud, longbows, and a narrow field became his allies. The rain turned the ground into a grave, trapping knights in heavy armor while arrows rained from above. It was not strength that decided Agincourt, but the clever use of terrain and patience in the face of overwhelming odds. The age of gunpowder transformed strategy, but it did not erase the eternal truths of war. Napoleon Bonaparte proved this with lightning-fast maneuvers that left enemies stunned. He moved armies as if they were pieces on a chessboard, striking where least expected, splitting coalitions before they could unite. His tactics at Austerlitz, where he feigned weakness only to crush his opponents in a decisive counterstroke, revealed the power of deception as a weapon as deadly as any cannon. In the modern world, strategies evolved with technology. The First World War brought trench lines stretching for miles, where old tactics led to slaughter. Yet in its aftermath, the Germans developed blitzkrieg, a storm of tanks, planes, and mobile infantry that shattered static defenses. In 1940, France fell not because its soldiers lacked courage, but because its leaders clung to the past, while their enemy mastered speed and coordination. Strategy had once again redefined the face of war. From ancient phalanxes to modern mechanized assaults, the history of battle has shown that victory belongs not always to the largest army, but to the sharpest mind. War punishes hesitation and rewards innovation. The greatest generals understood that tactics are more than maneuvers on a map. They are the heartbeat of survival and the legacy of nations. Each battlefield, no matter how distant in time, whispers the same truth. The difference between glory and ruin lies in the art of strategy. The power of deception and maneuver has always stood at the heart of warfare, shaping the outcomes of battles far more than sheer strength or numbers. History repeatedly shows us that those who could disguise their intentions, manipulate the enemy into fatal mistakes, and strike with precision at the right moment, often emerged victorious. Armies might bring tens of thousands of men, horses, and weapons to the field, but without cunning leadership, they often fell to smaller, smarter forces. Deception and maneuver are the silent killers of war, operating long before blades clash or cannons roar. One of the earliest and most striking examples is Hannibal's masterstroke at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. Facing a Roman army nearly twice the size of his own, Hannibal appeared to adopt a defensive stance, placing his weakest troops at the center of his line. As the Romans pressed forward, believing they were breaking through, they fell deeper into the trap. Hannibal's flanks, reinforced by his strongest soldiers, curved inward like a tightening net. Soon, the Romans were surrounded on all sides, trapped in a shrinking circle with no escape. Nearly 50,000 Roman soldiers were cut down in a single day. Hannibal's brilliance lay not in raw power, but in using deception and maneuver to turn Roman strength into weakness. It was a lesson that size alone could not guarantee victory. Centuries later, Napoleon Bonaparte refined deception into an art form. Known as the master of maneuver, he consistently outsmarted coalitions that often outnumbered him. At the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, Napoleon deliberately weakened his right flank, luring the Austro-Russian forces into attacking what appeared to be his vulnerable side. Once the enemy committed, he launched a devastating counterattack at their center, splitting their army in two and crushing them in a decisive blow. The Battle of the Three Emperors became a symbol of Napoleon's genius, showing how feigned weakness could transform into overwhelming strength when executed with timing and precision. Even in more modern wars, deception and maneuver remained key. During World War II, Operation Bodyguard before the Normandy landings showcased how elaborate deception could shape entire campaigns. Allied intelligence created fake armies, false radio traffic, and even inflatable tanks to convince the Germans that the invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais instead of Normandy. The Germans held back vital divisions, waiting for an attack that never came, allowing the Allies to establish their beachhead and push inland. Here, deception saved thousands of lives and shifted the balance of the war. Maneuver also became essential in the German strategy of blitzkrieg. Unlike the static trench warfare of World War I, blitzkrieg emphasized rapid movement, surprise, and coordination. By striking at weak points, bypassing strongholds, and encircling enemy forces, German commanders toppled countries in weeks that had expected to resist for months or years. This was deception on a strategic level, making the enemy believe they were prepared, only to find themselves outflanked and overwhelmed before they could react. The enduring truth is that deception exploits human psychology as much as military strength. Commanders who can make their enemy believe in a false reality gain a weapon more powerful than any sword, spear, or cannon. Maneuver turns that deception into physical dominance on the battlefield, cutting off supply lines, encircling forces, and striking where the enemy is weakest. Together, they have rewritten the fate of empires and nations. From Hannibal's double envelopment to Napoleon's feigned weakness, from the Allies' shadow armies to the lightning thrusts of blitzkrieg, the story is the same. Victory belongs not to the strongest, but to the cleverest. Deception blinds the enemy, maneuver delivers the killing blow, and history remembers the commanders who could wield both with mastery. Wars are often won long before they are fought, and it is in the mind of the strategist that battles are truly decided. The role of terrain and technology has been decisive in warfare throughout history, often proving more important than numbers or courage. Armies that understood how to use the land beneath their feet or the tools of their time to their advantage could topple far stronger opponents. Commanders who ignored these elements often led their men to disaster. Wars are not fought in empty spaces, but on ground that can be shaped into a weapon, and with technologies that constantly redefine what is possible. One of the clearest examples comes from the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. During the 100 Years' War, King Henry V of England faced a French army several times larger than his own. His men were exhausted, sick, and outnumbered, but Henry recognized the power of terrain. He positioned his army on a narrow field flanked by dense woods, which forced the French into a tight formation. Rain had soaked the ground, turning the field into deep mud. When the heavily armored French knights charged, they found themselves sinking, tripping, and unable to maneuver. Meanwhile, English longbowmen loosed thousands of arrows into the packed French lines. What should have been an overwhelming French victory turned into a slaughter, not because of numbers, but because Henry used terrain to transform the battlefield into a trap. Centuries later, terrain again shaped destiny during the American Revolutionary War. At the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775, colonial forces fortified a hill overlooking Boston. Though eventually overrun by the British, the colonists inflicted heavy casualties by using elevated ground to their advantage. Every step uphill cost the British dearly, teaching them that terrain could nullify their superior training and discipline. The lesson carried forward throughout the war, as American forces repeatedly used forests, rivers, and hills to stage ambushes and delay larger British armies. As history moved forward, technology began to play as crucial a role as terrain. The invention of gunpowder, cannons, and firearms shifted the balance of power away from armored knights and toward disciplined infantry and artillery. Castles that once stood as unbreakable fortresses crumbled before cannon fire, changing not only battles, but the very design of cities and states. Technology reshaped how wars were fought, forcing commanders to adapt or face annihilation. In the First World War, technology and terrain collided in brutal fashion. Machine guns, barbed wire, and artillery turned open ground into killing fields, forcing soldiers into trenches that stretched for hundreds of miles. Terrain became a nightmare of mud, craters, and shattered earth, where offensives gained only yards at the cost of thousands of lives. Commanders who clung to outdated strategies ignored how modern weapons had reshaped the battlefield, and millions paid the price. By World War II, lessons had been learned. Technology became the spearhead of strategy. Tanks, airplanes, and mechanized infantry enabled rapid advances that ignored natural terrain obstacles. The German blitzkrieg campaigns in Poland and France showed how combining technology with speed could overwhelm static defenses, yet terrain was never irrelevant. The vast steppes of Russia swallowed German armies, stretching their supply lines until winter and mud destroyed them more effectively than Soviet bullets. In the Pacific, islands became critical pieces of terrain, each one fought over at enormous cost because control of airfields and naval bases determined who could advance. The marriage of terrain and technology reached a dramatic point on June 6, 1944. D-Day! The beaches of Normandy were a fortress of German defenses, but Allied commanders combined technology, including paratroopers, amphibious landings, and naval bombardments, with careful study of terrain to break through. Engineers built temporary harbors, soldiers overcame beach obstacles, and the use of deception earlier ensured the Germans were caught unprepared. It was terrain and technology working hand in hand, opening the road to liberate Europe. The truth of history is clear. Those who master terrain and technology gain an edge that no amount of raw power can overcome. Terrain shapes the battlefield, and technology shapes how it can be fought. Together, they dictate the rhythm of war, turning forests into ambushes, hills into fortresses, mud into a weapon, and machines into the deciding factor. Commanders who ignore them are doomed to repeat the mistakes of those who believed bravery alone could overcome bullets, or that numbers could crush strategy. Victory belongs to those who adapt, and the story of war proves it time and again. War has never been decided by numbers alone. From the brilliance of deception and maneuver to the mastery of terrain and technology, history shows that battles are won by those who see beyond the obvious. Great commanders bend the land to their will, use innovation as a weapon, and strike not where the enemy is strong, but where they are blind. The legacy of these strategies is clear. Empires rise and fall not through chance, but through the minds that turned chaos into order and transformed the art of war into victories that changed the course of history.